Welcome to Toasting the Classics, a podcast where we take something people call a classic and we don't drink because this is a sober short. Today, I have Andrew Park. First time he's ever been on the show by himself. Andrew, say hi.
Hey, guys.
This is going to be a whole different experience for you because usually we have a crowd clamoring. You've been on with 5 people, you've been on with 4 people, and this is just the regular number 2. So this is a lot easier.
I generally lean on everyone else to do the talking. I just kind of put in my bon mots whenever I can. So
Yeah, you got to keep up your end a lot better when it's just you. You got to look at my face. You can tell whether I'm annoyed with what you're saying or whether I think what you're saying is idiotic or something. No, I don't know. But it's easier to keep track of one other person, and maybe we won't step on each other as much as we do when there's lots of people in the room. So, what do we decide to do this time?
so this time we are doing Billy Joel's 5th album, The Stranger.
5th album, is that right?
5th
Is it
studio
5?
album. Yep.
That's part of what I was interested in learning about. Why are we doing Billy Joel? Why did we choose that?
Well, part of it is I know that you and I are both fans of Billy Joel since, I don't know for you how long you've been a fan of, but I know for me it was since, when did we own CD? So I guess it would be maybe junior high school.
Okay, so I discovered, obviously I've known Billy Joel my whole life, right? But
Right.
the first time I ever really listened to him, I was on a trip for the Model United Nations, and this one kid had the CD, the greatest hits, the double CD of the greatest hits, and he played it, and I was just like, I knew who Billy Joel was, but I didn't realize how many songs I liked by him. So I
Hmm.
got that album and I listened to it over and over. And here
That's
comes
exactly
probably for you the biggest surprise of the podcast. I've never owned a Billy Joel album
really.
in my entire life, other than that greatest hits. I have never listened to an entire studio album by Billy Joel until yesterday when I started listening to this. So,
My situation is somewhat similar in that my entry to Billy Joel, I mean, like you, I've known Billy Joel since I was, born and, raised in the US, so I've heard of him and I heard the
right.
stuff on the radio. But it was the greatest hits album, that volume 1, volume 2, that I
Yeah.
don't even know why I'm sure my brother bought it, and I don't know if he was already a fan or whatever the reason was, but I was hooked on it just like you, and I listened to the whole thing, and then from there I started buying his newer releases. I think it started with The Bridge and then albums after that. And
Okay,
so I
because
have had listened to entire albums of his, but only the more recent stuff. And so
I think when I started listening to him was probably 1991, and I think he only released River of Dreams after that. And I didn't really have much interest in that album. That didn't sound that cool from what I heard on the radio, so I was just like, ah. But
yeah,
I knew all this music, but I didn't. I know it as the greatest hits because, for example, this one, "The Stranger," 1977, the one that we're talking about today, 7 songs in a row that are like, I don't know if there's an album that has 7 songs in a row that are as good as those 7 songs.
yeah.
Tracks 8 and 9, garbage. Absolute garbage. Like, not even worth listening to. I listened to them one time and I was like, what? Did he just go into the room and he said, we got to fill 8 minutes. Let's just play on the piano for a minute. And there's no
Well,
melody or anything to these songs. It's so bad. The drop off is so bad when you get to those songs. I don't know if it ruins the album, but I'm just like, why not just make an album that's 36 minutes? Why does it need to be 44? Is there a law? I don't
well,
know.
but that's the fun thing about it is that, and it was nice to sit down and actually listen to The Stranger from beginning to end because,
Mhm.
like I said, I've never actually listened to this album, but I'm familiar with, like you said, those first 5 songs were just, everyone knows those songs from Billy Joel, if,
Yeah.
if you have any sort of awareness of it. It reminded me how that's how it used to be for us. We would get a CD and we would just try to listen to as much as we can. We didn't have the option of just shuffling through like random playlists and everything else.
You
And
could
so,
shuffle the CD. My first CD player, you could actually just hit shuffle and listen to the CD and it would play things randomly.
right. Okay. Well, let me take it back further then. It's because of,
Tapes.
vinyl and
It was
tapes,
tapes and
especially.
vinyl where it was vinyl. You could learn where the thing was on your album and you could kind of put it to where that song was that you wanted. But
Right.
tapes were awful. There
Yeah.
were a couple of people I knew who had like a special thing where you could skip tracks on the cassette tape, but it
Hmm.
was pretty rare. It was a rare feature. But you still had to skip all the way through to what you wanted. You would listen to songs you didn't like on an album because
Right.
it was more work to get up and move the needle or fast forward or whatever. So you would just sit through these songs. This one, maybe you just start the tape over, I think, when you get finished with she's always a woman. But so I'm glad we talked before we did this because I originally was doing my research on The Stranger, the sex act,
I've not heard of that before in my
yeah,
life.
no, no, yeah, no, never
Oh
mind.
wait, I think I know what
We
you're
don't.
talking
It's
about
all
now.
right. We don't need to talk about it. But
Well, no, so I mean, do you want to just first talk a little bit about the background of the album and then we'll get into it, or how do you want to do this?
what kind of things do we want to say about the background? I mean, it's 1977, like I said, Columbia Records. This was, I think, their biggest selling album.
Yep.
at the time, like
Yeah.
the record breaker in 1977.
Yeah. In fact, this was going to be kind of, it sounded like it was going to be his make or break for Columbia Records. That Turnstiles was the album before this. It did all right, but there was basically at the point where like, you need to get us a hit, otherwise we're going to cut you. And so he actually, if he wanted to find a new producer, so he reached out to George Martin of the Beatles. George Martin.
Not the fat guy from New Mexico that writes fantasy novels.
No, not that guy.
Okay.
And so when he went to a concert and he liked what he heard from Billy Joel, but then he said, "But I want to use a professional studio band." And at this point, Billy had been playing with his touring band, and they've had like a real good connection and chemistry and everything. So he refused. As much as he loved the Beatles and as much as he really wanted to work with George Martin, he made the decision to say like, "All right, I'm going to have to say no to George Martin and find someone else." And that's when his wife at the time, Elizabeth Weber, called up Phil Ramone, and that started their, I think it was 5 albums that they worked on together. And this was, like you said, it was like the biggest hit in Columbia Records history at the time.
It was. It beat something by Paul Simon. I don't remember which one, but so I was looking at what he had before this album came out. And he's got his
Hmm.
first album's got She's Got Away. Okay, that's classic, but there's just 10 songs and that's the only one I've ever heard of, right?
Right.
Then you've got the second one has is Piano Man. Same thing. Piano Man's the only song on that I've ever. Oh no, that's not true. I know Captain Jack because it was on that double album that we
Right.
had when we were kids. But pretty mediocre, right? Like
Mhm.
overall. And then this third one has The Entertainer. That's the only song I've heard of from that. That's not great. But then here you go. When you get to Turnstiles, Turnstiles I don't think did very well, but it does have New York State of Mind
Hmm.
and Miami 2017 and Say Goodbye to Hollywood. So it's a couple of the Billy Joel songs there, but then all of a sudden this one is just it's 7 classic Billy Joel songs in a row to open the album, and it's if you look at the albums after that, they're more like that. What's the Christy Brinkley album? What's that one called? The one that has Tell Her About It and Uptown Girl and it's Innocent Man, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. Innocent Man, because
So
57th Street's the next one.
that one's like this. That one's like most bands don't have an album like that, and he's got two, and then there's a couple more between 77 and 93 that are like that with just
Right.
over like a bunch of really good songs on them. But that's those are the two really big ones. So he's only got in his whole career, let's see if this is a trivia question for you. Let's see if you know this. In his whole career, he's only got 3 number 1 hits. What do you think they are?
We didn't start the fire because I remember that was the
Yes,
big one.
that is one of them. Definitely shouldn't be. Not his best
Right.
song. I mean, I liked it when I was a kid. It was very distinctive, but no, that definitely shouldn't be one of them. But yeah, you
Um,
got that one.
I'm trying to think what actually would be considered like, because I know that he's had a lot of top 20s, but as for number ones, maybe Piano Man would be another number one.
Nope. Piano Man topped out at number 25.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
So yeah, it's just, and that's the thing. It's like he has a lot of songs that, and that's why I think Columbia Records was getting sour on him, because he would do well enough, but nothing that was like a huge hit. And
Yeah,
so
they were talking about getting rid of him basically.
yeah, and it's just crazy how you know him now as just this perennial artist that he's got such a huge catalog of songs. But that's why the only other thing I can think of is maybe Uptown Girl, just because of the notoriety with Christy Brinkley. But I can't think of any one of his other
You would
songs.
think so. You would think Uptown Girl, Piano Man, those are probably the two classic Billy Joel songs that
Yeah.
every American would know those songs. But no, neither of those is a number 1 hit. It's like I said, we didn't start the fire. You got that.
Hmm.
It's still rock and roll to me, and Tell Her About It.
Huh.
That's it. Those are the only number 1 songs that he ever had. Uptown Girl got up to number 3, so that's a pretty big hit, but
Yeah.
still
That's it, and
didn't
that's the
make
funny
it.
thing about it is I can't like put my finger on what would have made those songs. I mean, We Didn't Start the Fire was just a cultural thing that like, was just huge at when we were kids. But as for those other songs, I don't know why those would stand out more so than his other hits.
I don't think they do. My sort of hypothesis from looking at it is a lot of it has to do with name recognition for a band, right?
Hmm.
Or for an artist. You're not going to hit number 1 with the first, like if Piano Man didn't hit number 1, you can't hit number 1 with your first song. Like you just, that song is so prominent. Everybody knows that song. Didn't hit number 1 because it just wasn't, it probably would have hit number 1 in 1983 when everybody had heard of Billy Joel already.
Right.
But you got to have your foot in the door in order to get not always. Some number 1 hits are just random bands, but it tends you build momentum as you get bigger and you
Right.
sell more albums, even if you don't really deserve it. Like Tell Her About It. That's a good song. That's not Billy Joel's best song,
No, definitely
like
not.
by any stretch. Neither is Still Rock and Roll to me. Good song. It's not really like Billy Joel's best song. But I have kind of a theory I'm working on, which is that Billy Joel. Okay, so when this album came out, it was out for 4 months before it charted. This
Okay.
album ended up being the biggest selling album for Columbia Records of all time, and it took 4 months for it to chart. It then was on the charts for like 16 months or something like that, like for a really long time. But I think Billy Joel, and you're not going to like this, but I think Billy Joel's lame. He's not cool. And I think that's why people just really have to. It's like everybody likes the song, but they don't want to admit it to the other people. So everybody just kind of keeps buying the album. And once they hear it, it lingers, and other people still listen. Everybody I've talked to who lives in New York has gone to see Billy Joel.
Hmm.
Nobody tells you that as the first thing to tell you when they meet you.
Right.
It's just not that cool, but everybody loves it. And I think the way he charts is kind of similar to that, you
Yeah.
know. I
And
think
I'm
that's
not
why
going to
you and I
disagree with you.
liked him when we were in high school, because we're the kind of people that would admit how lame we are,
Right.
essentially. Like we really don't have a big complex about that kind of thing.
I mean, I don't disagree with you on that. And in fact, what it's funny for me because again, before that Greatest Hits album, before that made its way into my house somehow,
Hmm.
I and especially listening to The Stranger, thinking back on all the songs before, it's like the sound of it is something that I would have associated with my parents and associated with like, oh, this
Totally.
is yeah, and like
Totally.
it's just a sound that is just not my time, or actually not even because even though my parents immigrated to the U.S., after college, they both had like, kind of grown up listening to a lot of American pop hits and everything else, so they really love songs from like the 50s and the 60s. And so Billy Joel would be kind of this in between time for them. So I heard a lot of the oldies that Billy Joel
Hmm.
basically grew up on, and that probably helped made me be more of a fan of his because of
Oh,
the
sort
fact
of
that
primed you for that kind of music. Yeah, that
exactly,
makes
yeah,
it. Well, but it's also, I think that's why it's always considered kind of uncool, right? Because it's sort of music from before a
right,
lot of the time. It's not cutting edge in terms of
yeah,
what he's doing. It's still good music, and I think eventually when people are exposed to it, they start to like it. He's pretty good pop writer.
yeah.
Really,
And it's
really.
funny because I did an exercise with my kids. Like I've done this before when we were on car rides because I do just like put on Spotify or Apple Music, just put on a complete shuffle of like every song that I know, and I just let it play randomly. And so I started asking them every once in a while, I was like, okay, when you hear this song, and both my kids are teenagers, what time period do you associate this with? Like, and basically just drill down to like, is this grandma and grandpa's type of music? Is it
Yeah.
my kind of music? And of course, they've got no clue. They have just like, and it's just fun to like kind of see where they pick it out.
I was gonna
And
say, if you ask my kids things like that, they always give some ridiculous answer because they have no idea what time period is what.
yeah,
They just don't know history well enough. They're like, I don't know, is
exactly.
this from the 1930s? And you're like, what? Is this
Well,
from the
that's
Civil War? Like what?
right.
Just absolutely, completely uneducated opinion about things like that.
I had them listen to The Stranger over dinner the other night and say, okay, we've listened to the entire album. When do you think this album came out? And they both are like, I don't know, when you were a teenager. It's like, nope, that's when I was a fan of it, but that's not when it came out.
My
But they
kids have
also,
asked me if I fought in the Vietnam War. I mean, we're talking about people that don't know anything about the past. So I don't know that.
but the nice thing about it though is that they still sat through it and they enjoyed it. And because my
Mhm.
kids both play violin and they have like they've started developing this musical ear and this appreciation for melody and everything, they did really like a lot of the melodic aspects of the songs. And they one thing they really liked was Scenes from Italian Restaurant. They thought it
Mhm.
was amazing how well he put together like seamlessly the three parts of the song and made it into like one narrative and
Yeah.
everything. So it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
fun to like listen with them and see them kind of grow that kind of appreciation.
I hadn't really thought about it before, but when I was reading up on this album today, I realized that that's a medley, obviously. I guess I knew that.
Mhm.
I didn't realize each song had its individual name, like each
Yep.
part of the song has a name, and that it was inspired by Abbey Road. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, of course it is. It sounds
Yeah.
just like that. Like it
Right.
sounds exactly like the second half of Abbey Road that goes on for like, I want to say 7 tracks, seamlessly transitioning because Paul McCartney's capable of just writing an amazing melody and then getting bored with it and moving on to something
Right.
else that fast. So
Yeah,
I
but
think
at the
Billy
same
Joel's
time,
doing the same thing with that.
he did. I mean, but that's as much as I enjoy Abbey Road, it is very much distinct parts for each one. Whereas this one does make it feel like it's one extended narrative, and the fact that it's three different time signatures, and he still makes it seamless. Like with Abbey Road, it's like wherever the cuts are, like on the CD, for example, you can start and stop the song there, and it's it works. But then when you listen through it, it's kind of a little more disjointed. Whereas this one, you can
A
still
little
listen
bit,
to three
yeah.
parts, but it also still works as one continuous song.
Yeah. I went to karaoke last night
Hmm.
at this place called Sid Gold's where they play the piano for you and you sing along with the piano. It's incredibly high difficulty karaoke. I do not do well, but it's fun. I was like, I've got to do something from this album because we're doing the show tomorrow. And I thought about doing scenes from an Italian restaurant, but I was looking at these poor people and I was like, I don't know if I want to subject them to 7 minutes of me mangling Billy Joel. So I did just the way you are, which is I think a pretty solid song.
Yeah.
I remember that one. And then I always get it mixed up, but it's not on this album. I think it's My Life.
Yeah,
That's the first one I ever heard. That was on the radio when I was a little kid. I think that one's from maybe 79. I was not quite three, and I remember my mother being in the car with her and hearing that song on the radio. It's
right.
like on Q107, if you remember that radio station
Yeah, I remember
back in
that.
the day.
But
So
my
that
first memory of My Life was from the Bosom Buddies, the Tom Hanks sitcom.
never seen it. I'm
Okay,
aware that
well,
it exists. I've never seen that show, but
yeah.
yeah.
So they used that. I don't know if it was a cover or the original version as the theme song for that show. And the funny thing is, if you ever catch reruns on it on TV, it's that one of these things where like they didn't plan for reruns, so they lost the rights to My Life. So there's some other
Oh.
song that's on now whenever they show it on the air.
Maybe I knew this sort of, but I didn't realize he sort of never made another album after River of Dreams, or at least not a like a studio album with new songs. He does
Yeah, it
there's lots of
was
live stuff.
from my understanding, like a conscious choice that one, he was just done with pop music and he did a classical album where he composed an album and then had another pianist, the classically trained pianist, perform it. But it was also, I think it was like one of those kind of contract disputes with the label that
Hmm.
they required him to have X number of albums and he just didn't feel like he had it in him to create any more like new material. So he's been basically letting them do like greatest hits after greatest hits kind of things, and that finishes up his like contract.
Yeah, there's like greatest hits, there's some live albums, things like
Right.
that. I think one thing we have to talk about when we talk about this album, there's a couple of bad choices that Billy Joel makes through his career. One
Mhm.
of which is a missed bad choice. Thank goodness this never happened. Apparently he used to sing Only the Good Die Young in a Jamaican accent.
Yeah, it was apparently started as
Thank,
a reggae song.
thank God what was he thinking? It's just, but then I remembered Big Shot. There's that part where he does that silly voice in the middle of that song where he's like, "Oh no, you had to be a big shot."
Hmm.
That's a terrible choice. And then the number one terrible choice that he actually made is at the beginning of this album, his biggest album of all time, when he says "ack ack ack ack." Every time I hear that, I think, why, just why? Why would you do that? Like, who
Yeah.
advised you that that was a good sound to make at the beginning of a song? But what do I know? He sold what, 10 million of these,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and at the same time, there are all these different stories from that album of choices that he could have made or almost made that like, changed the direction of it. Like, for example, I don't know if well, for Moving Out, when he started playing it for the band, he didn't realize that he was using the melody of Laughter in the Rain by Neil Sedaka.
Oh
And it
yeah,
was,
yeah. I don't know that song, I don't think, but
yeah, I listened to it and it's like, oh my gosh, it fits. Like the tempo and everything
I
fits.
didn't bother listening because I figured it doesn't sound like it anymore.
You can
You
hear
can
the
still hear it?
similarities.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Huh.
And so it's his drummer, Liberty DeVito, who's played with him. He's one of those touring bandmates that has been around with him for decades now. Oh yeah, it was also he almost did not put Just the Way You Are on the album,
Uh-huh. Yeah. For
and
some
it's just
reason, Linda Ronstadt was involved with that choice,
yeah.
and that's someone who is a big gap in my music knowledge. I can't name a single song by Linda Ronstadt, but I know a lot of people really like her. I think
Well,
she's
there
a little
was
bit like the female Billy Joel in a lot of ways. Like the same kind of person likes, if it's a woman, she likes Linda Ronstadt and not Billy Joel, or maybe also Billy Joel, but I
well,
think
there's that song from the American Tail, that cartoon movie.
American. What song did she
Um,
sing? Somewhere Out There?
yeah,
Or No Cats in America? That's my other favorite one from that movie.
I actually never saw the movie, so I only know Somewhere Out
We
There.
always say that Karina is like Fievel because she's like a little Russian Jewish mouse that came to America because she thought the streets were paved with cheese.
Another reason why I like this is because there's a shout out to Hackensack, which was my city of birth,
Oh
so
yeah.
that's always fun.
Oh, is that where you were? I didn't know
Yeah,
that. That's
yep,
interesting.
Hackensack, New Jersey.
Well, who needs a house out in Hackensack, right?
Yep. Well, we live in an apartment, so it doesn't really count, but
Well,
close enough.
you didn't need a house. That's perfect. Yeah. So I guess talking about surprises from this album, first of all, I didn't realize how slow his career started. Like how long he was out there doing albums. Like Piano Man did not really make him. I mean, I guess it did in a way, but She's Got Away came out like the year after the Beatles broke up. That's weird to me.
Yeah.
I always think that we've done so many things on this show, Led Zeppelin and The Who, and just realizing how much music came out between 1968 and like 1972.
Hmm.
And the weird, like Led Zeppelin and Billy Joel are like at the same time,
Right.
which is of course they are, but at the same time it doesn't seem like it. That really surprised me, just how slow his career started and how far back he goes as being, fairly successful, like selling albums
Right.
almost contemporaneous with the Beatles. That's strange to me.
It's also just, I don't think he could have had the career he did if he didn't come out when he did. That the way that the music industry works now and the way that, that one, I mean, he's not a classically attractive man and,
No.
that, and this his style of music is something that just needs a slow burn and needs to build up. And just for the fact that he managed to stay on Columbia Records for all those decades before before this album became his big hit. I mean, I don't think anyone would be able to get that kind of leeway in this day and age.
So I kind of would agree with that, but there was this one time, and I'm looking it up right now because I don't want to say the name of the band wrong. Yeah, it's Glass Animals. So I was looking at like, oh, what's the number one song in America right now? And I saw it was the song by Glass Animals. And I was like, wait a minute, I heard that song like 2 years ago. What is that all about? And I looked it up, and sure enough, this band had debuted this song, and it took 18 months for it to be a number one hit in America. It took 18 months of the song being out there on Spotify and stuff because it was this really slow burn, I guess, and it just didn't have a lot of attention. And the same thing kind of happened with Chapel Roan. Like she released most of her music, I don't know, several years ago, but it was out there on the internet sort of gathering steam, and then last summer all of a sudden she was like the biggest thing in the world.
Hmm.
Actually are these sort of weird acts because Chapel Roan is kind of old-timey in a way, right? She's writing music that sounds like it's from the 80s and 90s. Maybe it's a little bit of that same kind of thing. It isn't really contemporary, but everybody likes it when they hear it. It's sort of
Right.
similar to Billy Joel, I think.
So I guess maybe then it does depend on the kind of music. Like if you're talking about true pop, like the way that pop is these days, then it's more like a flash in the pan kind of situation. If you don't hit it, then you're gone.
Hmm.
Whereas like if you
Yeah.
have songs that actually have more of like a hook and a melody that can keep it going, then they have a little bit more leeway.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure, but it's an interesting phenomenon because that song, that Glass Animal song I was talking about, I looked it up and it was the longest lead ever from the release of a song to becoming number one. So it was definitely because my first thought was like, wait, I know this song. This has been around forever, but it was strange that it took so long to be number one. But well, oh, one thing that really surprised me was that the song on Snoop Dogg's first album, The Shiznit,
Hmm.
samples The Stranger. I had to listen to it like 6 times before I could tell what they were talking about, right? The part that's like dun 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 dun.
Yep.
Now I'm singing the Snoop Dogg version because it's so similar. It's not a sample, but it's definitely, I guess technically that is a sample when you copy somebody's music like that.
Yeah.
But it's not, he adjusts it just enough that it's not quite easy to remember which one is which when you do it. But I
Yeah.
had to listen several times before I was like, okay, no, it really is. It really is a copy of the Billy Joel song, which is very unlikely bedfellows, if you ask me. Snoop Dogg and Billy Joel, but
But
whatever.
but isn't that the whole thing with Dr. Dre is that he has this like library in his head of all these musical notes or whatever from songs from the 70s, and he's just able to insert them in all these
Yeah.
rap songs
And
now.
also just a pile of vinyl albums that you can go through and listen to them and pick up beats and things like that. There's all
Right.
this, we did a whole episode on Dr. Dre, and that's a lot of what it is because then they actually use a band to play the songs. It's not just
Oh,
a
okay.
sample that Snoop Dogg's doing. He's got a band in the studio playing that, so they can adjust it a little bit and make it. It's actually pretty good music. Those two first albums, especially. But I found the Italian restaurant, by the way. It was called Fontana di Trevi. It's
Oh
on
yes, I think I'm hearing about that.
West 57th Street, right below, like a couple blocks below the park, just barely on the west side. So I could walk down there and see where it used to be and see what's there today if I wanted to. I don't know.
Right.
That restaurant closed a long time ago, but
I can't remember if that was the one he talked about, but apparently he mentioned some when everyone asked him like, "Oh, which Italian restaurant are
he
you
said it was
singing about in the
someplace in
song?"
Syosset, but yeah,
Right.
I
And
don't know.
so, but he for him it was like eventually it was the one that you're mentioning, but also just it is just that stereotypical Italian New York restaurant with the vinyl line the tablecloth and
The
the
red, the
autos the
red and
Chianti.
white checkered tablecloth kind of
Yep.
thing. Yeah. I love
Yep.
those places. There's actually one in my neighborhood that's exactly what I want from that kind of place. It's nothing
Yep.
fancy, but it's like a really nice little place.
Yep.
So, I mean, are we going to vote on this? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So, would you vote for The Stranger? It is The Stranger your favorite Billy Joel album, I think is a better question.
Well, and that's exactly what I was gonna like pose to you is that because I mean, we both saw him at Madison Square Garden,
Oh, we
thanks to
didn't even
you.
talk about that.
Yeah.
That's right. So when I first moved up here, I knew you'd want to see it. So I actually called Andrew's wife and I told her I wanted to like trick you to get up here so that you get here and I could surprise you with it. So I told her that I needed you to help me fix a window. And this is what kind of a nice guy Andrew was. He's just like, okay, sure, I'll do that. So
Well,
you
it's
come
also
on
an
up,
excuse to come up to New York and hang
you
out.
get
So
here and you're like, so what is it? We have to do a window? And I was like, oh, here, look at my phone. And I showed you the tickets, and it was like that. I felt that was a fun surprise to do. But
yeah.
thank goodness Kai played along with it. So
No, she was
Yeah.
great with it. It helped reaffirm for me that as old as he was, and even though the music sounds different, that he's one of those art. Like I've heard Paul McCartney live, and it almost pains me sometimes to hear him live these days, just because.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just like I mean, he's still, amazingly talented, and he's got the musical ability still, but just because of his voice, and he just doesn't have the same kind of stage presence that Billy Joel does. That, in my
yeah.
opinion, at least. And so,
Well,
even though
yeah.
Billy Joel can stand there or sit there at his piano and just play the music, he does it in a way that is it's just so much fun to go, and it's every song is a hit with his fans, and everyone's singing
Yeah.
along with every single one. So that's why it's hard to say. To me, it's like, yes, his catalog is classic. So I'm not going to vote against any of, like, especially the hits of his. But
Yeah.
is The Stranger the standout one? I mean, I think it has to be just because of the fact that this could have been the end of his career. That
Hmm.
that he could have
Yep.
lost the
So
label
it's
and everything
important.
else.
It's like an important Billy Joel
Right.
album, even if it, yeah, I mean, and it's also like I said, 7 of 9 is a
Yeah.
pretty good ratio of good
Yeah.
songs.
Especially because I think only four of them were actually officially released, and people still found the other songs, and they still made
I
them
think
into like hits.
I think for a person who's not a fan, I think Vienna is probably the weak link. That's probably the one that most people wouldn't know. It's not a weak link in terms of it not being a good song, but that's probably the least recognizable.
Mhm.
But if you know Billy Joel at all, you're going to know that. So,
But it's funny that Vienna's had a second life because what I recall, the 13 Going on 30 with Jennifer
oh yeah.
Garner, that
Mhm.
brought that song back into the pop culture,
Vienna was Vienna was in that movie? I don't
yeah.
remember that.
And so because of that, and it was funny for me to like hearing all these people like, oh, Vienna's such a great song. It's like that song hasn't been on anyone's mind in like decades, literally decades at that point.
Well,
And
that's why like Bohemian Rhapsody is like the #1 streamed song ever,
mhm,
right? Is because it came out, it was a popular song when it came out, everybody forgot about it. It
right.
came out, they did Wayne's World exact like 15 years later, which is like perfect. And our generation was introduced to it. And
Mhm,
then they did the Queen movie a few years back and introduced that song again to a whole different. So now you've just obviously, 100 billion downloads because everybody's been exposed to that
right.
song. And so if you get like a second wave with a song that way, the way like Star Wars was reintroduced to kids because they did a new series of movies and things like that.
Mhm,
That's how you really get up there in the numbers. So we're voting for it. Stranger is a classic. When I saw Billy Joel was the first time I went to a concert, and like you said, he doesn't mess around. He just plays the hits.
mhm.
He just starts and he plays like one or two deep catalog songs through the whole show. Just the hits, 20 of the hits that you want to hear. And I've noticed, I've gone to see some older performers now, and like even Morrissey was like, I'm just playing the Smith song that everybody wants to hear. Like I'm not going to waste everybody's time. I'm
Right.
only in business now because of the stuff I did 30 years ago, and I'm not going to waste your time. So I think people have learned to do that, and I think they may have learned it from Billy Joel, who's just been in resident. I mean, he's done now, but he was in residence for a long time, making a ton of money playing the classic hits. So.
Yeah, I mean, and with it, I mean, obviously it helps when you have such a huge catalog. So you can play even, he could play part of his catalog, and it still would be like, oh, he's just playing all of his hits because he's got so much more to like, as backup. But one thing I do want to say though is just kind of funny to me that you're talking about how Queen, it's like they created the formula of get the song into something that gets into the zeitgeist, and it, revitalizes
Mhm.
the album sales and career and everything else. And that's what those greatest hits albums used to be, is that
Right.
if nothing was coming out for a while, put out a great hits album. You might get some record sales. You might get it into like some younger people's, music players, CDs, cassettes, whatever else like that. Can't imagine that greatest hits albums are a thing anymore when you have access to the entire catalog.
No, it wouldn't need to be, right?
Yeah.
You do a movie, and you could have a
Yeah.
bunch of songs in the movie. But I remember that those Blue and Red Beatles albums came out when I was
Hmm.
about 16, and I knew the Beatles. I'd known the Beatles my whole life, but for some reason, having that in my hand and listening to it just reopened the Beatles to me. And I spent like about 2 years going through all their old albums and,
Yeah.
and becoming like a much bigger Beatles fan because of those greatest hits albums.
Yeah, and
So,
that's the thing. It's like those two artists in particular. It was because of the greatest hits for Billy Joel and for the Beatles that I became such a huge fan of both those guys. And Queen also used to have a greatest hits album, but I never got into that as much. It was only maybe
mhm.
later on that I saw, oh, they do have a greatest hits album. I could just listen to all these and hear all their hits, but
Yeah.
it didn't catch on like these two artists did for me.
No, no, not the same way. Yeah, I had the Highlander soundtrack. That's how I was listening to Queen. Like that, but that's not even their best work.
Yeah, that's
But
like very.
anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we are voting for the 1977 Billy Joel album, The Stranger. It is now a classic according to the auspices of Toasting the Classics. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Not a problem. And I'll meet you anytime you want in our Italian restaurant.
Nice, nice. Well done. That's what we're calling this chat room from now on. All right, so peace out, everybody. Thanks for joining us in Toasting the Classics. Talk to you later.